You are listening to Dove Valley Deep Divers with Erick Trickel
and Lance Sanderson.
Ball comes out of the hands of Newton. It's on the ground, picked up by T.J. Ward at the 4-yard line. Vaughn Miller did it again.
On Overtime Media.
Okay, we're live. We're going to let the stream breathe here just for a minute. Make sure it's nice and stable for our awesome listeners out there in Broncos country. Welcome in, everybody, to the Dove Valley Deep Divers live. I'm your host temporarily here, Chad Jensen, and with me is Erick Trickel, one of the two lockdown co-hosts of the Dove Valley Deep Divers podcast. Erick, I know this is the second Dove Valley Deep Divers pod in the last couple of days, man. How you doing?
Doing pretty good. Just relaxing, getting ready for Mother's Day tomorrow. Do something for my wife, whose birthday is also coming up too. So kind of a 2-in-1 for us tomorrow. How
far out's her birthday?
It is Thursday.
Thursday. Yeah, that's close.
Yeah.
Right on, man. I know it's during these times, it's kind of, I found myself anyway, speaking for myself here, I kind of found myself at a loss in terms of what to do for my wife for Mother's Day. And she likes playing in the yard quite a bit. So I just ended up going down to Home Depot and finding some, that kind of stuff makes my wife more happy than like bringing home flowers or jewelry or anything like that. She wants, weed whackers. She wants leaf blowers and, tools and stuff like that.
Yeah. My wife, she wants a child plushie from the Mandalorian show. Been trying to find one of those. And she also wants makeup that I have no idea what I'm looking at when I look at makeup.
I feel you there. Did you hear that they cast the actor who played Jango Fett to play Boba in Mandalorian 2?
I did. I saw it actually just after we got off the podcast last night, and I was just running around running around my place, like screaming basically out of excitement for it. Boba Fett's my favorite character in Star Wars, so.
Yes, he was definitely one of mine growing up and reading the books. For those of us who grew up with Star Wars in the late 70s, early 80s, we didn't have additional Star Wars content until the 90s rolled around, and we got the expanded universe. Now it's no longer canon. They're calling it Legends and all that, right? But back then it was considered canon, and that's what we had to live on for a good decade until The Phantom Menace finally came out. But anyway, there was a book I read back then that featured all the bounty hunters, like little short stories about the bounty hunters from Mos Eisley Cantina and Jabba's Palace and all that. Not to derail this podcast on Star Wars, but Boba Fett, I think, is a pretty popular character in all of Star Wars canon. And if you listen to George Lucas, here's what's interesting. If you listen to George Lucas, he claims Boba Fett is in actuality not a Mandalorian, which we know he was the son of a clone, right?
Yeah.
And that the armor he wears I don't think it was passed on from Jango. Of course, Jango wore the armor, but the armor Boba wears was stolen. It's like stolen valor. If you get busted dressed like a Marine trying to get sympathy or whatever, it's like that kind of a stolen valor thing for Boba Fett.
Yeah, and that's something that they actually touched on a lot in the Legends books, was Boba Fett not really being Mandalorian and him just kind of being adopted into that lifestyle. And even Jango Fett wasn't really Mandalorian too. He was from, I can't think of the planet's name, but it's like their sister planet, and he kind of was adopted into it as well. And all that stuff's interesting. And the whole Mandalorian, that whole thing is it's my favorite. One of my favorite series is actually the Republic Commando series, because you really touch into the Mandalorian side of the training sergeants for the Clone Wars. Very
cool. I think as it relates to the Star Wars visual content since Disney took over, I would honestly say that Rogue One, for me, used to be number one until Mandalorian came out. Now it's Mandalorian, Rogue One, probably Han Solo. I'd probably throw in The Force Awakens. I was really excited coming out of The Force Awakens, even though it was recapitulating everything from A New Hope and all that. As you know, we've had a lot of discussions about this over the years. The Last Jedi killed it for me, and it almost made me I can't even watch the newest one, the what is it, Rise of Skywalker. Anyway, yeah. Let's get off Star Wars. Guys, what we're going to talk about tonight is, these podcasts over the last couple of weeks since the draft ended. Of course, we spent a lot of time talking about the premium round picks, talking about the Jerry Judys and the KJ Hamlers and the Lloyd Cushenberrys, and for good reason. I mean, premium round picks come with their own unique set of elevated expectations, let's call it. But we haven't spent as much time talking about the later round picks. And even though you might not quite qualify a fourth round pick as a late round, it's more of a mid round. We're going to start with the fourth round, go through the seventh round, and kind of discuss where these guys fit in. But first, just a couple of really quick matters of business, you guys. Make sure you're following the Dove Valley Deep Divers podcast on Twitter at DVDD_pod. And while you're at it, you're going to want to also make sure that you're following at Mile High Huddle, the main account. That's where you get the breaking Broncos news and analysis as it's happening in real time. And when you get a second, head on over to huddleuppod.com. and get your swag on. There's hats, whether you pick your podcast. You Huddle Up, Dove Valley Deep Divers, Building the Broncos. There's hats, there's shirts for each podcast so you can rep your favorite pod with pride. There's the Mile High Huddle mask, which has been very popular. I don't know where I said it. That's been our number one seller basically for the last 3 weeks. Ever since we put it on, it's every single day orders coming in for that Mile High Huddle face mask, mugs. Whether you're male, whether you're female, there's a little something for everybody on the merch store. It's just another simple way that you can support what we're doing here at Mile High Huddle. And if it's not in the cards financially, we know a lot of people going through tough times right now. It's all good. The simplest thing you can do besides being here with us and contributing to the conversation in the chat stream is by liking and sharing this video. Whether you're watching currently on YouTube, if you're on Periscope, if you're on Facebook, wherever you're watching this, make sure you please like the video. You guys have no idea how much that helps us. And if you really like what Eric and I are going to be doing here tonight, what we're talking about, share this video out there. Help us reach additional fans out there in Broncos country who might, like you, appreciate what we're doing here.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All right, Eric, let's start with, in fact, really quick, before we do that, let me just say hello to those who have been hanging out in the chat stream. Buona Beast, of course. Good to see you, brother. Mitch, Big E, Charlie, Steve, what's up? Let's see who else is in here. Robert, good to see you. The Bronx legend in the hizzy. Mr. Clutch, it's good to see all you guys. Welcome in. Thank you for joining us. I know it's kind of when you've got a major holiday falling on a Saturday, it kind of everyone's out probably doing a lot of different things right now. I'm sure in very socially responsible ways, don't get me wrong, but people are trying to be active and enjoy. Most places, I think, in the country right now are warming up, and people are trying to enjoy that and enjoy the moms out there. So, and by the way, a early Happy Mother's Day to all of the great mothers out there in Broncos country and in our community. We appreciate and value each one of you. All right, Eric, let's talk about Alberto. I'm not going to butcher his name. You do a much better job pronouncing his name than I do. But Alberto, let's face it, when that pick came in, both of us were a little bit taken aback. I know you were well versed on Alberto. I know there's a lot about his game that you appreciate and that you like. You would take a tight end there considering who were some of the other players on the board, though. We don't necessarily need to go down that road. He's a Bronco now. So how does he fit? He runs a faster 40 than Noah Fant. And I know, Eric, the one thing that you have touched on in particular is it's great that he has that straight line speed, Alberto, but where's the short area quickness? Where's the explosivity? Where's the athleticism? What does he really bring to the table? Let's start with that, and then we'll talk about how he might fit.
Well, Albert Okwuegbunam definitely brings a guy who he can stretch the seam, which really right away, that's about all he's going to be able to bring to this. I mean, he can offer up some ability in the red zone with his ability to go get contested catches. It's not great, but it is a little bit better than what Noah Fant offers up there. That was a big weakness with Noah Fant. So they got better in that aspect of it. He's not a great blocker. I mean, he's actually worse than Noah Fant. I was so disappointed watching him block. Like, I don't get how people can walk away watching him and think he was a good blocker. But yeah, it's just that straight line speed that he brings. Asking him to change his direction, you're going to be disappointed. Big guy, can't sink his hips and make quick cuts or anything like that. So that's going to be a big issue as well. It's going to take time. It's going to take development. He was definitely a pick that, okay, he's a guy who's going to come in. He's going to be that number 3 tight end, play 5-10 snaps a game, and offer up a decent seam stretcher to back up Noah Fant in case Noah Fant gets hurt or Nick Van Nett gets hurt or somebody else gets hurt on this offense. Just a one-tool guy right away that they're playing for development down the road.
Right. I just, if it was a different offensive coordinator, I could get a lot more excited in the short term and become a lot more bullish about Albert O's upside in this offense, at least as a rookie. I know eventually he can present all kinds of value for this team, and that connection that he has and experience and, it might take a little bit of time to kind of rekindle that chemistry that he and Drew Lock had at Missouri. But all that, it all adds up, and it's all good, and it's all positive addition to the offense. But as you've talked about a lot since the Pat Shurmur hire was made back in January, he utilizes the tight end. It's just he doesn't utilize more than one tight end on the field unless it's an obvious blocking situation or goal line, short yardage. And so you think to yourself, well, in those situations, Albert O will have his opportunities. But no, that's where they're going to have Nick Van Ed on the field blocking. They're going to need blocking in those situations with a few exceptions. I mean, you're going to try and run some play action in those situations to catch your opponent off guard if and when you can. But Jesse, we appreciate you joining us, my friend, and for the kind words. Indeed. Let's see. Cheers from, that's right, Cusco. You're in Peru, right? Man, Broncos country is, in fact, a state of being. It's not a geographic location. Let's grab this awesome super chat here real quick from George, jumping in, a bona fide star, huge member of our community. We appreciate you so much, George. So consistent, so outgoing, generous, and we love your contributions to what we're doing here at Mile High Huddle. He says, hope you guys are having a great start to the weekend. So far, so good, my friend. But yeah, it will be interesting to see how it all shakes out. In all honesty, I think Albert O, you can kind of look at his rookie year as probably being a red shirt type of year, unless something happens to Noah Fant. Because if something even happens to Nick Van Ent, knock on wood, you don't want to see any kind of injury happen to Eric. But if something were to happen to Nick Van Ent, that would, in theory, bump Albert O up the depth chart, but he's still not going to get very many snaps.
Yeah. One thing that I do like about Albert Okwuegbunam and what he can bring to this offense too is just it opens up a lot more with what they can do with other players. We could potentially see Fant and Sutton out wide with either Jerry Jeudy or KJ Hamler in the slot, and using Albert Okwuegbunam from that inline wide tight end position, which that's going to be hard for defenses to cover because you're pulling out your corners and then you have a mismatch. And I saw somebody else say this in the chat, and it's actually very true. While he ran a 4.49 40 at the combine, that isn't what he plays to. I spoke to multiple scouts, and they expected him to run somewhere north of a 4.7. It completely caught everybody off guard that he ran a 4.49 because that's not what he plays to. Every now and then, you can kind of see it close to that, like a 4.55, about between there and a 4.6. But it's just not that fast. He's just not that mismatch piece, really. If he can play to that speed, though, he can be. And then you're going to have to either force a corner over to help guard him or keep a safety over the top for him because there's not many linebackers in the NFL that can keep up with him. Unfortunately for the Broncos, they happen to play a few of those teams this year that have those types of tight ends. I mean, look at Devin White and potentially Devin Bush if he improves his coverage. But yeah, it still offers up a decent piece, but I think that there's a little bit more of that play on. He has the chemistry with Drew Lock, which, yeah, it's going to help, but it's not going to be a huge help right away just because of everywhere else that's so weak.
By the way, just a quick aside, guys, this hat, I think I've only worn it a couple times on the podcast, but this is a hat that was made by a Mile High Huddle alum and a really close friend of mine by the name of Ray Roybal. In Denver, and he is an all-timer, dude. Let me tell you something. Ray is one of my good buddies, and he had some hats made up, the last of which I know there's been some demand for this orange Mile High Huddle hat that we just have not been able to get up on the website because our back-end provider, Eric, they don't stock orange. So anyway, but Ray had these made up, and this is the one that I kind of kept for myself over the years. I've given out a bunch of other hats to awesome members of the community over the years, long before we started doing the live pods. And this is the one that I've held on to. So maybe we'll see if we can't get a version of this very hat up on the site here in the near future. All right, Eric, let's shift gears, moving on to the fifth round. And the Broncos take an athletic linebacker who I know you expected to go a little bit earlier, even with that bicep injury, and Wake Forest's Justin Sternad. What is he – first off, does he supplant Josie Jewell on the depth chart in terms of order on the field as a rookie, or do you think that's still a little ways off?
I think it's a little bit difficult to say because of what they do is very different. I think that Josie Jewell is becoming a key piece on special teams, and I'm not sure if Sternad is able to supplant that aspect of it right away. But I do think that when it comes to the defense, I think he may be that number 3 piece over the other linebackers because of what he does offer up in coverage. But it's going to take time for him to make the adjustment to the NFL and make sure he is fully healthy too. So he might be able to supplant him on the defensive depth chart, but I can't. It's hard to say right now until we see him actually what he does out there on the field.
After I watched a little tape on him, I was surprised that he checked in at 238 pounds, Sternad, because he doesn't look like he's that big. I mean, he looks a little bit thicker, but similar to almost Justin Simmons, in my opinion, but he does bring those LBs to the table. He does have the weight. And so I'm thinking to myself, man, what this dude could do, maybe I'm getting a little out over my skis here, but I'm thinking maybe you could even bring him in as that third safety in certain situations to just kind of patrol the box. Maybe that'd be pushing it a little too much. But either way, I think that a lot of these guys, when you start getting into the later rounds, as exciting as they are, most of them, their impact's going to come quite a ways down the road. Now, Sternad, he's going to be a player on special teams, health willing. You probably aren't going to see him too much on the field as far as the defense because Todd Davis and Alexander Johnson, they just are a few levels above from run defenders' perspective, from being trusted by the coaches to know all the assignments and know the calls and all that stuff. It's just going to take time for Sternad to get all those things down and make it fight his way onto the field. I mean, even Alexander Johnson, it took him a solid year and some change to finally see the field. And even Vic Fangio, when fans were going, man, where's this guy been all our lives? What took so long? Even Fangio didn't quite know what he had in Alexander Johnson until he hit the field. And by the way, Bronx legend jumping in, a true legend, just like his moniker says there, $5 super chat, bona fide superstar. You've got a hat coming your way, my friend. Eric and I were just talking about this right before we went live. Because of the word that shall go unnamed, the situation we're all dealing with right now, the merch store is slightly delayed in getting things sent out, but the order is in. You should be seeing it very soon. We really appreciate you, my friend. That's just a small token of our gratitude for your contributions to our community. He says, Albert O plays a lot slower than his straight line speed. Almost stiff, Eric.
Yeah, that's very true. That's exactly what I was sitting there talking about. He has that straight line speed, which isn't what he plays to in college or on his tape, but he is so stiff that his change of direction is just, it's very eye-opening about just how I'm trying to think of the best way to put this, how unnatural of a mover he is when you watch him try to change his direction.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
He is an enormous human, as Drew Lock called him in that interview that he did last Tuesday, press conference, virtual press conference. Nad Ludlow jumping in, so consistent, bona fide superstar. You've really, I think, Nad, earned your way into becoming a Super Chat superstar, and we really appreciate you, my friend. If you, I assume you have an email address, you should reach out and email us, milehighhuddle@gmail.com, and allow us to show a little love your way, send a little love your way, maybe send you a hat, maybe send you a T-shirt, something like that. We really appreciate how consistent you are to Super Chat, and then also, of course, in the community, in the chat stream. It means a lot, my friend. Damon jumping in, $10 super. Thank you, Damon. Since it's an eventuality, maybe calling it C19 won't get you demonetized. Either way, I hope you guys are having a great day in the States. I'm out here living in South Korea. Wow. Are you in the military? I'm just curious. We really appreciate your support and proving that Broncos country is not a geographic location. It is a state of being. Damon, we really appreciate that. We'll take it into consideration. I think they've kind of, these social media censorious penchants that the big channels, YouTube, Facebook, all of them, that they've kind of had with regard to certain things. And you understand it because you don't want misinformation in a perfect world going out and being magnified. But still, I think they've kind of relaxed some of those initial strictures that hurt the Mile High Huddle channel, at least on YouTube. But still, we don't want to tempt fate. We don't want to roll the dice and have our videos get suppressed. So we're just going to continue to refer to it as the word that shall go unnamed. Derek jumping in. Appreciate that $10 super chat, my friend. And all of you guys, if our superstars, if you're on Twitter, make sure you reach out and let us know so that we can connect with you and tag you and show you a little thanks and shout you out after this podcast. But he says, guys, what's your opinion on McTelvin Agim? I didn't know much about him, but the more I read and the more I've watched, he seems like he has a relentless motor. Eric, he was a third-round pick, so we weren't planning on necessarily talking about him. But, hey, Derek wants to know your thoughts on Agim.
I actually really like him. I was actually really foolish about him prior to the draft. I limited him as just a 3-tech and not a fit in Denver's scheme, which is true. In Denver's base scheme, they don't really use 3-techs. But Denver's in sub-package over 70% of the time, almost 80% of the time, where those defensive ends become 3-techs. So I was very foolish for just a big oversight on my part to just write him off and everything like that, not even considering the whole sub-package thing of it. But this guy, he can absolutely kill it as a 3-tech. I think that he has a lot of quickness to really cross the face of the center and create all kinds of problems getting interior pressure. He was in college, he actually was his most effective when lining up as a 0 or 1 technique, which is the nose tackle position. So he definitely has the quickness and everything. And adding him with Draymond Jones, both of whom have that same ability to just quickly win on the inside against the center, is going to create all kinds of problems, especially with Vic Fangio's defense, where he likes to stunt defenders. It can be really enticing to watch. He definitely needs some work on his technique, but this is a guy who his agent, of course, it's his agent, so take it with a grain of salt. But his agent came out and said that he's going to be, outside of the round 1 defensive lineman, he's going to be the best interior pass rusher, and he definitely has that potential.
Yeah, when an agent speaks, it's like your mom talking about how smart her boy is. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, but nevertheless, it's all part of the puzzle, and it's all part of the tapestry. We got to take it. It's all information that we want to absorb and see how it all fits. Vinay jumping in with a question on YouTube. If Josie Jewell is seeming to be a special teams piece and Sternad as the third linebacker, then can't Joe Jones perhaps push Jewell off the roster? You know, he does bring more special teams acumen. I would maybe not quite call Joe Jones a special teams maven, because he had a lot of faux pas last year in particular on special teams. But nevertheless, your answer for Renee.
I think it's a possibility, though unlikely. I think that Josie Jewell, with his leadership that he brings to, that's an unspoken aspect that Josie Jewell brings to the special teams unit, is that he's just a leader. He just gets to make sure that guys are trying to do their job and do them the right way. And I think that aspect is something that pushes him over Joe Jones. Joe Jones has always been talked about more highly than he's actually performed and showed that he should be getting talked about. And I mean, at one point he was being talked about, oh, he's the answer for tight ends, and he got hurt, and then he just never has been able to show that. He's been limited to special teams. At least with Josie Jewell, we know that if he has to play on defense, he's at least a solid run defender. He can be used in certain short zone coverages as well and be somewhat effective. So I think that just when you're looking at special teams, you have to look at what they can do on their side of the ball as well. And I think that's one reason, too, why Josie Jewell just has a big edge over Joe Jones. It'll take a lot for Joe Jones to push him off.
Robert, by the way, hey, can any of the crew from Spaced Invaders make a good off-ball linebacker, making fun of our nerddom on Star Wars? And Damon, yep, he is military. Really cool, man. We appreciate your service, brother. All right, let's see here. Sternad, we've talked about him. Let's get to the 6th round. Netani Muti, the offensive guard from Fresno State. Now, far be it from me to completely derail our conversation on offensive line, because, Eric, I know it's been particularly your last week or so of podcasting has been fraught with offensive line shade and whatnot. But nevertheless, and by the way, Eric published today an article on the Denver Broncos left tackle, myth busting some perhaps misconceptions about him. Go check it out when you get some time, milehighhuddle.com. But let's get back to Muti. So, I mean, if you really boil down Muti, 2nd round maybe talent, but an undrafted injury concern, basically. And the Broncos said, look, in the 6th round, Mike Munchak's like, hey, let's just take a flyer on this dude, because if we can get him healthy and keep him healthy, he could be a starting caliber player for us down the road.
Yeah, I really like Nathaniel Muti and what he can bring to the offensive line. My thing is I'm not expecting him to start this year. I don't think anybody really should be expecting him to start this year. There are still some concerns. He was cleared to play, but he's still not 100% healthy yet. So that's something that they've got to work out too. They have the pieces there with Dalton Reisner, Lloyd Cushenberry, and Graham Glasgow to let him get healthy and then come in and contribute. And they can sit there and then have a competition. If all 4 of them start and show well, then that's great. You have a great depth piece. I don't think the plan is to move Dalton Reisner over to tackle. I may be wrong there. It's just not the sense that I'm getting with all the conversations I've had about it. It seems to be that they want to keep him inside. They want to keep Glasgow inside. Nathaniel Muti, he played tackle a little bit at Fresno State, but I don't want to say he was bad there, but he definitely was a better inside. So it just seems to be that they just want to sit there and get the inside for sure settled down, which makes sense because Drew Lock has a bigger issue dealing with interior pressure than dealing with pressure from the outside.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun. If you jump on YouTube and turn on some Natani Muti cut-ups, man, that guy is just a monster. And one thing that is different, I compare his bully mentality on the field a little bit, pile driving dudes, every pancaking every chance he gets. I compare it a little bit to Garrett Bowles coming out of Utah with one major difference. Natani Muti, not to say that Garrett Bowles is not having fun on the field, but Natani Muti is playing with just a pure joy of the game, dude, and he is having fun. And when his guy scores a touchdown or makes a big play, he's like, on a lot of those highlights, he's the first guy down the field to lift him up and celebrate with him. And so very passionate, very enthusiastic. And if Mike Munchak and Chris Cooper can find a way to keep him healthy along, with the medical staff, but first and foremost, but if they can refine some of those, because a lot of the things you see him do at Fresno State, Eric, pancaking dudes and kind of playing right to and beyond that whistle borderline, he's going to draw some penalties in the NFL, just like Garrett Bowles has had to kind of bump his head along the way and figure out. But nevertheless, he's a really interesting player. Do you think he makes the 53-man roster this year?
I think that's actually a very interesting question. I would not be shocked at all if he gets hurt towards the end of preseason and lands on injured reserve. But at the same time, looking at the depth on the interior, I don't know if they can really afford that. I know they like Patrick Morris. I know Austin Schlottman has some love for him. But outside of those two, that interior is really not that good. And Elijah Wilkinson, him continuing to play at tackle is just mind-boggling to me. But he's more interior offensive lineman, in my opinion. But it's an interesting conversation to have because that's definitely a possibility. It's not what I would do because I think that he is just so much better than all the other interior offensive linemen they have to back up their starters. So we'll see what happens, but I think in the end he will.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
I do too. But you're right. And that's something that NFL teams do quite often is those fringe guys that they don't quite want to risk to the waiver wire suddenly pull up lame on the injury report somewhere toward the end of August and they got to go on injured reserve. And now where, you can bring 2 guys off injured reserve, it's kind of changes that equation a little bit too and only adds to it more in terms of I would be willing to bet that increased teams' willingness to put guys, accept the risk of or the loss of saying, look, we're going to put them on injured reserve. We don't get him for 8 weeks, but at least we're guaranteed that no other team can take a swipe at this guy and claim him on the injury wire or the waiver wire, excuse me. And Bronx, you're right, dude. Muti's tape is insane. He is an absolute monster out there on the field, very talented, and it'll be interesting to see. I mean, it's a good problem to have. The Broncos now have a pretty stacked interior. In a perfect world, I mean, especially when you factor in Lloyd Cushenberry and Graham Glasgow, in a perfect world, you would also like them to have a lot more options at the offensive tackle position, but no team is perfect from, roster spot number 1 to roster spot number 53. And the Broncos, they just simply don't, even though they didn't pick up Garrett Bowles' 5th-year option, they simply don't view the offensive tackle position with anywhere near the panic that many in the media and a lot of fans do. So they're going to kind of, it's just like today. I bet I received Eric at least 2 or 3 questions on Twitter about whether or not the Broncos will go out and sign a Jason Peters or Cordy Glenn. And my answer is, if they haven't done it up to this point, the answer is they're probably not going to, if and unless they get to training camp and either Bowles and James are just not looking good or one of them gets hurt. And then they have a little Evan Mathis slush fund that they can use to hopefully go out and still get someone who might be available. But I don't think Jason Peters will be.
Yeah, I don't think so either. There's a lot of word going around about him going back to Philadelphia. That's really been going around a lot lately. And I think that with Denver, if they're looking at an offensive tackle, I think a Kelvin Beachum is more likely the guy that they'll be looking at over Jason Peters. And I think part of that is the age. Jason Peters is 38 years old. He's already been dealing with some injury concerns, and he also had a major drop off in his play over the last few years. So I'm just not sure he's that big upgrade to start. And they need to find a guy who can be that swing tackle, because outside of Elijah Wilkinson, they don't have anybody that offers that up. And including Elijah Wilkinson, they don't have anybody that offers that up in a good way, because Elijah Wilkinson was terrible at right tackle last year.
Yeah, I mean, you tip your cap to him because he stepped into the breach and tried to, basically stop the gap when James went down, but he's an interior guy miscast playing tackle, which makes it so surprising to me, Eric, that they're going out on a public level and saying he's going to compete with Garrett Bowles. I understand that you're probably, as a team, you're trying to send a message to Bowles. You're trying to motivate him. You're trying to galvanize him. But does anyone really believe Elijah Wilkinson stands a chance in hell of beating Garrett Bowles for the job just from a pure ability perspective, unless Bowles just goes into it and I wouldn't even say crap the bed. I would say gets in a fist fight with Mike Munchak. He's not losing that job to Elijah Wilkinson. So it's more of just a posturing deal where Elway is basically saying nothing more shall be given thee, Garrett Bowles, without thou first earning it.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And when we talked about him and the 5th-year option that was declined and everything, that was one of the points I was trying to make. I know Lance got actually a lot more heated about it and a lot more upset about them declining it, but it's all about sending a message. That's what they've been trying to do. He showed improvement last year after the bye week, and that myth-busting article there, that talks about it a little bit. But the thing is that they still want him to take that next step. If they sit there and they pick up that 5th-year option, there's nothing to him that says, oh, I really have to step it up because I get $11 million. There's nothing there for that. Now there is. Now there's that whole fact that, hey, this guy is going to be coming in, and if he outperforms, he's going to get the starting job. Maybe that will be finally what it takes to really get through Garrett Bowles and sit there and really put in the extra work needed. I think another big boost, too, for him is that Mike Munchak and Chris Cooper have finally found a way to get through to him with his learning disability that he has to help him be able to pick up what he needs to do and be taught what he needs to be do.
Yep. That's something that too often either gets made light of or is just missed by people, is that Garrett Bowles has more athletic ability in his pinky finger than he does than a guy like Elijah Wilkinson. But what Elijah Wilkinson has that Bowles doesn't is Bowles has a learning disability that makes it just takes longer for things to stick for him, for information. He can be taught something like in a classroom setting. And I understand this because I have a brother that struggles with a similar type of learning disability. It doesn't mean they're stupid, but far from it. What it means is it takes longer for things to stick and retain when they're being taught something than the average person because of the way their brain, and depends on what the learning disability is. There's dyslexia that is a whole different thing, but nevertheless, it's kind of, I think, a bigger reason why it's taken so long for Bowles to get it than people actually realize. And if he can finally punch in and grasp everything, man, he is a very talented player. So let's not completely bog down the conversation. Let's move on to the 7th round here. Tyree Cleveland, wide receiver, Florida. This was another one of those picks that Zach and myself, we took some heat because we didn't give the Broncos draft class a perfect grade. This was one of those picks where we're just like, really? Tyree Cleveland. All right. Maybe if you didn't already take 2 wide receivers with back-to-back picks, and I get it, it's 7th round. What do you got to lose? We're taking a flyer. But Eric, you brought up something that I think is likely to have a lot of truth and veracity to it. And that is that this pick smacks of a position coach pounding the table saying, just give him to me. What do we got to lose? I want this guy, Tyree Cleveland.
He has, what people don't realize is that he has serious potential, and it's just the potential that he's never been able to reach at Florida. A lot of that was the whole Flippy Franks and their whole quarterback situation and just everything with their offense. It was so bogged down, and people don't realize too is that Florida actually had quite a few talented receivers, which also impacted his ability to contribute. So it's a high upside player that just needs a lot of development and that fire lit under him. And watching him play, like, you can see the flashes of potential to be a really good receiver in the NFL. I don't think he's like number 1, number 2, or even number 3 caliber, but as that number 4, number 5 receiver, he can really contribute. He offers up special teams ability. And one of my favorite things about his whole play is what he can do as a gunner. So I think that he has a chance to make this roster because of that special teams ability that he brings to the team.
Let me grab this one here from Big E Bronco. He says, when do you all believe training camp will actually start, and will fans be able to go to it this year like they have in the past? Well, Big E, we don't know the answers for sure to those questions, either one of those questions, quite yet. However, John Elway has said publicly on more than one occasion that he thinks training camp will start on time. Now, as we all know, the word that shall go unmentioned that is affecting our entire civilization right now doesn't care what John Elway's opinion is on the schedule in the NFL calendar, right? So, like, there are things outside of the NFL's control, but I'm inclined to agree that by the time you get to July, a lot of these guidelines will be loosened up a little bit. I seriously doubt that. Well, first off, I do think training camp will happen at the end of July, one way or another. That's just my bold prediction. However, I think you should just say goodbye to the idea of not only being present for training camp, but having those autograph signing opportunities at the end of each practice session. Eric, even just from a liability perspective, that's not a bridge the Broncos want to cross with so many unknowns happening right now with the word that shall go unnamed.
I think if they do have fans there, and I think it's a long shot, there's going to be serious restrictions on what's able to happen. There's going to be a limit on the number of people there. They're going to be so spread out and everything. It's definitely not going to be the normal training camp that we have had for multiple years. I think it's a long shot to even, not necessarily for training camp to happen, but for fans to be there. It's just so much uncertainty going forward right now. And with so much time still, over 2 months until then, it's very hard to say.
All right, guys, we got one more to go, and then we got to wind down this conversation, cut it a little bit shorter than we normally would most of our live podcasts. Of course, one podcast every day in the week. You get 7 Mile Huddle podcasts each and every week. Normally they go an hour. Today's case, because I got some things going on with Mother's Day coming and just things happening, I don't have as much time as I normally have. So any questions that you might have, get them in. We'll get to them in the stream. And let's get to the last pick. And this is a guy, Eric, that really intrigues me. Derek Tuska, the edge defender, rush linebacker, whatever, from North Dakota State. The way this guy tested at the combine, it really surprises me, Eric, that he basically came this close from going undrafted. Was it simply the small school consideration that saw him fall so far, or what?
I guess it has to be, because I haven't heard of any injury stuff with him. Obviously, no athletic questions. I mean, even though he's tested out well athletically, you don't really see it on tape. So maybe that has something to do with it, just not adding up. But he's a guy who he's just going to go through the offensive tackle to get the pressure on the quarterback. He dominated that level of competition. And this is a guy who, and I stated this on the video on YouTube about him, is watching his tape, I am confident with saying that Derek Tuska is a guy who's going to be able to outperform his draft position. He was the second to last pick in the draft. And this is a guy who is just has the traits, and the best thing is he has the mentality. He's a guy who he has that chip on his shoulder and wants to go out there, wants to get better and contribute. Will he be a star in the NFL? I'm not going to say that, but I think he can sit there and be a really good depth pass rusher.
I'm really excited to see him out there. I mean, I haven't watched a ton of film on him yet. What I've seen, he's a very intriguing young guy. And if a guy like Malik Reed, who worked his ass off last summer to make this roster, if a guy like Malik Reed, who went undrafted out in Nevada, and as Eric knows, Malik Reed was one of those guys that when I turned on the film, and maybe I just picked the wrong games to watch for him, I came away just completely unimpressed by him at Nevada. And then when he became a Bronco and the plays he was making in the preseason, and I mean, it was clear that he had a lot to bring to the table. But even still, if a guy like Malik Reed can come in and affect the depth chart and make a play for the roster like he did, I think Derek Tuska is going to be garnering a lot of this coaching staff's scrutiny, Eric. This is a coaching staff that is looking for sacks. Yes, you got Von Miller. Yes, you got Bradley Chubb. Unfortunately, it didn't add up to many sacks last year in Vic Fangio's first year as the head coach and defensive play caller in Denver. A lot of that, I'm sure, has to do ultimately with the fact that Chubb was lost after week 4 for the entire season. But even up to that point, Eric, you had Vic Fangio's defense going into week 4 without a takeaway or a sack. And so this is a team that, they're going to find ways to manufacture sacks. You talk a lot about, I know in your writings, Eric, Vic Fangio's penchant for the twists and the stunts and, finding ways to get home to the quarterback without having to send multiple blitzers and additional rushers. That's why they put a premium on guys who can create that pressure on their own without help, which is why I think Tuska is a guy you got to kind of mark early as a dark horse to make this roster, even if it means potentially unseating a guy like Justin Hollins, who, I'm sorry, Eric, stop the off-ball linebacker talk with Justin Hollins. It's not in his wheelhouse, dude. You might have think, as a coaching staff, they might have thought he was smart enough to handle both, and I'm sure he is. But from a skill set perspective, I just don't see it.
I actually can't really disagree with that when it comes to Justin Hollins, but I hate to disappoint everything seems to be that they're still trying to get him to be that cover guy, and just because he's just so athletic, so long and lanky, that to use him that way. But when it comes to Derek Tuska and being able to come in and contribute and push off another guy, is Malik Reed, as great as he was early on in the season and preseason, he really fell off a cliff. Like, he just stopped being effective after about the first 8 weeks or so. And then you have Jeremiah Tauchu, who, he finally came in and he started getting there towards the end of the season. But he's a guy that they were able to find on the street for a reason. Their depth at edge was not that great. And so adding a guy like Tuska to bring that competition with that chip on his shoulder, we're going to either see these guys step up or they're going to get cut. And that's what it all comes down to. I mean, you want to field your best 53 out there, and he's going to help push for the best 53.
Dave D. in Cali, one of our Super Chat superstars, jumping in. Really appreciate that, Dave. $10 super. And by the way, send me that picture that's your profile pic with the MHH mask on and the Broncos stuff on the background, the plaques and whatnot, and the banners. Send that to me, dude. Let's shout you out and get you some love on social media and Instagram and whatnot. He says, no question, just sitting back, enjoying the pod. Really appreciate you, Dave. Mitch wants to know, what's a gunner? A gunner is on punt coverage teams. The two guys on the outside that are running down, their jobs to get down there and get the punt returner, those are the gunners. Yep. FYI. All right, Eric, let's see what questions we might have before we get out of here. And again, guys, it's my fault that we might have to get out of here a little bit earlier than we traditionally prefer to. Vinay wants to know, do the Broncos like Deshaun Hamilton or Tim Patrick more? And if Sutton, Judy, Hamler, Cleveland, Spencer, Deontay Spencer, if they were all to make the roster, would the Broncos prefer the bigger body or the guy who worked better for Locke for the sixth wide receiver? Eric, my instinct to answer that first question is follow the draft pedigree. Tim Patrick, undrafted. Deshaun Hamilton represents a fourth-round investment for this team, and I think he's a more polished player, offers more in terms of what the Broncos need than Patrick. Patrick is basically a Cortland Sutton light. He's like an ideal backup to Cortland Sutton, not a guy you want to be the tip of the spear, like your number one, number two option. Whereas Hamilton, you can use him on the outside. It's not his best place to be on the field, but what he does from the slot, what he can present from the slot, he might end up getting eclipsed here by Hamler in that sense, and Judy for what it's worth. But still, I think he brings more to the table and also represents that draft pedigree, which Patrick does not.
Well, I think for at least for me, is I'm not so sure Deontay Spencer makes this roster. I know Vic Fangio said that he doesn't want KJ Hamler returning punts and everything like that, but there's this whole roster math thing you have to work in, and if you can't fit a returner, just a returner like Deontay Spencer is, then you got to go with KJ Hamler and look at getting these other guys. You also got to go and look at what they can do on special teams. And outside of returnability, Deontay Spencer's not bringing anything to special teams. He's not bringing much to the offense either. Tim Patrick and Deshaun Hamilton, they can bring a lot more to the offense. And at least in Tim Patrick's case, he can bring a lot more to special teams as well. We haven't seen it really with Deshaun Hamilton. Well, a little bit we did see him on special teams. Wasn't that bad. So there's just more potential there as well. I think that if those other, 4 receivers there with Sutton, Judy, Hamler, and Cleveland are there, then I think I'm going to go with Hamilton and Patrick as the final 2 over Spencer and one of those 2.
Agreed. 100% agreed. Well, hit the like button. Always enjoy the shows. Hosts crossing over at times. Shows how smart and versatile the staff is. Appreciate that, Buana. Head to milehighhuddle.com for articles. That's a great point. And not only that, but to keep the conversation going, we would love, like those draft streams we did, be able to just hang out for hours, blocks of time, each and every day with you guys. But the feasibility of that is impossible. So the one way that we can keep that conversation going, though, outside of our hour-long streams each and every day, is at milehighhuddle.com, in the comment section, in the community section. That's where we want you guys to be. We want you hanging out there with us. Eric and I are hanging out on that at milehighhuddle.com literally all day long, dude. And we're engaging in the comments. Not only are we publishing and writing articles and videos and all that, but we are engaging with our awesome community there. And so many of our great listeners and members of the community on YouTube, Facebook have funneled over to the site. But this is a call to action to continue. If you haven't done that, do it, because it helps us out big time in terms of milehighhuddle.com being kind of the cornerstone of everything we do. Without milehighhuddle.com, without the site, this never would have happened. Our YouTube channel, the podcast, it all starts with the written content first. That's, for lack of a better term, Eric, that's our bread and butter. And so we want you guys there. We want you participating in every little comment, every contribution makes a big difference. Every read, every click, it all makes a huge difference. So help us keep that conversation going by heading over to milehighhuddle.com. James jumping in as well, saying a lot of and by the way, one of our Super Chat superstars and a big-time member of the community, technically, I guess you could say on staff too, because he helps us on the MHH Facebook group, the Superfan group, as a mod. And we appreciate you, James. Across the pond, he says a lot of teams might have standards for arm length at edge that might lead to more questions about Tuszka. He's not big. He's not too explosive, but he has good production in bend and useful traits.
That's actually very true. And it's like that with all these different positions, offensive tackle, defensive line. I know that with Vic Fangio, he tends to like his defensive linemen to be a little bit longer, which is one reason why Shelby Harris at one point wasn't expected to return, is he just doesn't have quite that length. But other circumstances, of course, came into play with that. But yeah, with Derek Tuszka, that's definitely a valid point, is that he may not have the length that a lot of other teams valued. And a lot of teams do value that length at it, sometimes overvalued it. There's been a lot of not so good pass rushers getting taken early, largely because of either them being a great athlete or having the length. But yeah, that's a valid point. I think that at edge, I don't think length is as important for Denver, but it definitely is a factor for them.
Gustavo on YouTube jumping in to say, I watch you guys every day from El Paso, Texas, right on the border from Juarez. Very cool, Gustavo. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate you. And it's so cool to hear where everybody's from in our community. And it's a community on YouTube that is growing exponentially. I mean, our website, milehighhuddle.com, is the #1 team website on Sports Illustrated, SI.com. And so that's growing exponentially. Our YouTube audience, our YouTube community, growing exponentially. And every new addition to the community, Eric and I, we sit back and we're just like, wow, it's so cool to see how far-reaching Broncos country really is and how much passion for this team and interest in learning the game of football, knowing what's happening day to day from a news perspective, deep diving with weirdos like us who spend way too much time on football. It means a lot to us. So thanks, Gustavo. And Richard, hey man, we're with you. If there's only 10 likes right now on YouTube, that's an all-time low. That's an all-time low for us. And I know it's kind of a weird, sleepy Saturday in terms of it being a holiday weekend. And a lot of our regulars are out doing stuff with mom and spending time with family. And God bless you for it. But help us overcome that a little, guys. Make sure you like this video on your way out the door. And Jeff, sorry, I had to rush to get back for the last few minutes. Good to have you, my friend. Eric, I think we've pretty much covered the main topics we wanted to land on today. Actually, real quick, I heard about this kid too, the North Dakota State quarterback. What are your thoughts on this kid? I read an article. Actually, I didn't read the article. I read a headline. I didn't have time to click on it, but that said that he's the best quarterback. You don't know his name or something like that. Something to that effect. Your thoughts on that kid?
Well, name's Trey Lance, and if you don't know his name now, you're going to. This is a guy who I knew about him during the season, but I didn't really spend much time watching him. I was too busy, obviously, focused on this year's draft prospects. And I know who Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields are, so those were my top two quarterbacks for next year. But when I actually got around to digging into Trey Lance over this last week, there's a good possibility if he continues to play like he did and improve off of what he did last year, he could end up into that tier 1 quarterback group with just Trevor Lawrence and ahead of Justin Fields. Right now I have him in that tier 2 just behind Justin Fields, but there's something about him that just makes you feel all giddy inside that thinks he's going to be something special in the NFL.
All right, guys, we got to get out of here again. A few minutes short. We had a great conversation. We're already sitting here, Eric, at almost 51 minutes. To me, it feels like it's been 10 minutes we've been talking, but that's what having a great community that keeps things so active and engaging can do for you. Time just flies, baby. But unfortunately, got to get out of here for today, you guys. Make sure, a couple of quick reminders here, make sure you are following the Dove Valley Deep Divers podcast on Twitter. Every follow helps. Every follow matters. We want you to be engaged with us on social media. Another way to keep the conversation going as we talk about. Also, while you're at it, you want to make sure you are following the main MHH Twitter account at Mile High Huddle. That way you miss nothing, whether it's an article getting tweeted out, whether it's a video or a podcast or a live stream. As long as you're following Mile High Huddle, you will miss nothing. And while you're at it as well, you got to follow my part here, Erick Trickel, at Erick Trickel. Just don't forget it's Eric with a K, CK, I should say. At Erick Trickel. You can find me at Chad and Jensen. And then, guys, if you get some time, head on over to huddleuppod.com, get your swag on, find the podcast of your choice, and here I'll put the URL in the chat stream. It's an easy click, and you're there. Huddleuppod.com, another way to support what we're doing here at Mile High Huddle. And if it's not in the cards for you, it's all good, guys. We just appreciate you being here on this podcast with us, participating in the conversation. And guys, Eric's signing off for tonight. I'll be back tomorrow, 6:15 Mountain, 6:15 somewhere in there Mountain, 8:15 Eastern with Zach to launch a fresh week of the Huddle Up podcast. And Eric, thanks for inviting me to co-host with you tonight. It was a lot of fun, as always, my brother.
Yeah, thanks for coming. I always enjoy you coming on because then I don't have to run things. But yeah, it's always a good time having you on here, Chad. It's always fun to sit and talk.
Guys, thanks to each and every one of you for joining us. A special Mile High salute to our Super Chat superstars. You guys mean the world to us. And each and every day we pinch ourselves and just can't believe how fortunate we are to have such dedicated listeners of the show and members of the community. We really appreciate you guys. A special shout out also to Buona Beast and James Campbell, two guys who are keeping everybody in line in our respective communities, one on Facebook, one on YouTube. And of course, Buona Beast is going to be getting a lot more involved with the podcasts, all the podcasts, as we move forward into the future. More information coming on that in the very near future. But guys, that'll do it for today. Eric, have a great start to your week, my brother.
Yeah, you too.
And again, another early shout out to all the moms out there. We love you. And happy early Mother's Day. For Eric, I'm Chad. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow night.
You've been listening to the Huddle Up Podcast. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.